Mother-in-law, you weren't invited. Get out of here before you embarrass us. The sentence echoed through the crowded ballroom, freezing my blood. I'm Eleanor, 68 years old, a widow, and the former financial director of this university. My daughter-in-law thinks I'm a nobody, but the most powerful man in this room knows exactly who paid the bills for this building. The smell of hairspray and imported perfume saturated the air in the ballroom, mixed with the aroma of fancy appetizers that waiters balanced on silver trays. I had spent the entire afternoon getting ready. I chose my best navy blue linen suit, the one I bought at a discreet boutique downtown, and pinned on the pearl brooch my late husband Albert gave me for our silver anniversary. I looked at myself in the mirror before leaving and saw a dignified woman with well-cut white hair and the straight posture of someone who spent 40 years managing multi-million-dollar budgets, even though my family thought I just stamped papers in the university's administrative office. Liam's graduation was the event of the year for our family. My first grandson, the boy I rocked when he had colic, the boy for whom I anonymously paid for his English course and study abroad program, pretending the money came from an old savings account of his grandfather's, so as not to wound my son, Roger's pride. Roger is a good man, but spineless. He has let himself be completely dominated by his wife, Tiffany. Tiffany? A woman who measures a person's worth by the label on their clothes. Ever since she entered our lives, she has made it a point to create a chasm between them and me. To her, I was just the old widow who lived in a vintage, two-story house in a quiet, historic neighborhood, someone who didn't fit in with the new life of luxury they tried to flaunt in a gated community, drowning in debt that I pretended not to see. I didn't want to bother them. I just wanted to see my Liam in his cap and gown, tossing that mortarboard into the air. I arrived discreetly in a taxi, clutching my small handbag tightly. The security guard at the door frowned, but when I showed him my ID, he checked something in the system and let me pass with a strange, almost reverent smile. I didn't understand it at the time, I just thanked him and went inside. The ballroom was stunning, with immense crystal chandeliers and tables decorated with flower arrangements that cost more than most people's retirement checks. I tried to stay in a corner near a pillar, searching with my eyes for my grandson's face amidst the crowd of euphoric young people and their families. That's when she saw me. Tiffany crossed the ballroom like a bulldozer in a hot pink silk dress. The clatter of her heels on the marble floor seemed to announce a coming storm. She wasn't smiling. Her face was twisted into a mask of contained fury, her eyes wide like someone who has just spotted a cockroach on the dinner table. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, getting close enough for me to smell the strong scent of champagne on her breath. "I came to see Liam, Tiffany. It's his graduation," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, though my hands began to sweat inside my fine gloves. I didn't want to get in the way. I just wanted to... Get in the way? She cut me off, her voice rising an octave. "You have no sense, do you? Look around, Eleanor. Look at these people. This is the elite. They are business leaders, politicians, important people, and you show up here in that museum piece outfit. It's a linen suit, Tiffany. It's elegant." I tried to defend myself, feeling my face flush. "It's poor old lady clothes," she shrieked. It was at that moment that a silence began to spread to the nearby tables. Conversation ceased. 300 people. It felt like 300 pairs of eyes were burning into my back. Roger, my son, was right behind her. He was staring at his shoes, unable to face his mother or confront his wife. That hurt more than any scream. His inaction was a knife in my chest. And Liam? My dear Liam was talking to his friends a little further away. He heard the commotion, turned, saw the scene, and turned his back. He pretended he didn't see. The boy I taught to ride a bike, who cried on my lap when he scraped his knee, chose shame over loyalty. Tiffany realized she had an audience, and unfortunately, that only emboldened her. She took a step forward, invading my personal space, pointing that finger with a perfectly painted press-on nail in my face. "Mother-in-law, you weren't invited. The guest list was restricted. We didn't put your name down because we knew you wouldn't know how to behave. Get out of here before you embarrass us more than you already are. Get out." The words hit me like a physical slap. A woman my age, who had worked her whole life, who had built an ironclad reputation at this very institution, being shooed away like a stray dog by her own daughter-in-law. I felt a hot tear roll down my cheek, but I wiped it away quickly. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of my scandalous weeping. I looked at Roger one last time, hoping, praying he would say something. "Mom, stay." "Tiffany, stop." But he continued to examine the tips of his Italian shoes. "All right," I murmured, my voice coming out hoarse. "I'm leaving." "Good. And use the back exit so no one sees you're part of our family," Tiffany added, fixing her hair as if she had just dealt with an unpleasant administrative problem. I turned around. The walk to the exit felt like an eternity. I could feel the stares of pity, of curiosity, of scorn. I heard whispers. "Who is that lady?" What an awkward situation. That woman kicked out the old lady. How horrible. But no one did anything. No one stood up. Society is like that. Everyone condemns cruelty as long as they don't have to intervene and stain their own party clothes. My knees were trembling. With every step, flashes of my life passed before my eyes. I remembered the days I stayed late at the University Foundation office, reviewing spreadsheets to ensure there was money for scholarships for needy students. I remembered when I approved the funding for the construction of this very convention center where we were standing. I signed the checks, I negotiated with the contractors, I chose the color of that marble where Tiffany was clicking her heels. No one there knew. To them and to my own ungrateful family, I was just Mrs. Eleanor, the retired widow who baked coffee cake and watched soap operas. I had kept my professional past discreet because I believed that real power doesn't need a spotlight. Albert always used to say, "Eleanor, you're the engine of this place, but let them think they're driving the car." Maybe I had been wrong to be so humble. Maybe humility, in excess, becomes a doormat for the arrogant to wipe their feet on. I pushed the heavy glass door and the cold night air hit my face, drying the cold sweat of humiliation. The parking lot was quiet, lit only by the yellowish glow of the lampposts. The contrast with the noise and brightness inside was brutal. I felt small. My dignity seemed to have been left inside, trampled along with the confetti on the floor. I opened my purse to find my phone and call a car service. My fingers were trembling so much that I dropped the device on the asphalt. "Damn it," I sobbed, crouching down with difficulty to pick it up. The pain in my back, which I had been ignoring all night, decided to make a forceful appearance. I stayed there, crouched, holding the phone with its cracked screen, and I allowed the tears to come. A cry of anger, of disappointment. How had I raised such a weak son? Where did I go wrong? And Liam, my God, his contempt hurt more than his mother's rudeness. It was then that I heard the sound of a powerful engine approaching. A large, luxurious black car stopped a few feet from where I was. I tried to compose myself, wiping my face with the back of my hand, ready to step aside and let it pass. I thought it was a late guest. The rear door of the car opened and a man got out. He was wearing black academic robes with a red doctoral hood, the official attire of the chancellery. He was tall, with graying hair and an imposing posture. He seemed rushed, adjusting his cap, but he stopped abruptly when he saw me trying to stand up. "Ma'am, are you all right?" His voice was deep and concerned. He approached quickly to help me. When the lamplight illuminated my face, he froze. His eyes narrowed for a second, focusing on me, and then widened in absolute recognition. "Mrs. Eleanor?" he asked in a tone that mixed disbelief with genuine joy. "Eleanor Bennett." I looked up and recognized him immediately. Those intelligent brown eyes hadn't changed at all, despite the wrinkles around them. "Robert?" I asked, still stunned. "I mean, Chancellor Robert?" He smiled, a broad smile that broke all the formality of his academic attire. Completely ignoring protocol, he took both of my hands warmly. "Good heavens, it really is you. I can't believe it." He glanced at the ballroom and then back at me. "What are you doing out here?" "The tribute ceremony is starting in 20 minutes, and I was desperate, thinking you wouldn't come. I sent 3 invitations to your old address." I was speechless for a moment. Tribute? Invitations? I moved 2 years ago, right after Albert passed away, and in the confusion of the move, a lot of mail got lost. I came for my grandson's graduation, Robert. Liam Bennett. Liam is your grandson? He seemed surprised. That young man from the engineering program. I had no idea. The last name is common. I never connected it. But wait, why are you out here in the dark with red eyes? I took a deep breath. The shame tried to silence me again. How could I tell the magnificent chancellor of the state university that I had been thrown out of the party like an unwanted gatecrasher? But looking at Robert's face, I remembered the skinny boy who, 30 years ago, had walked into my office crying because he didn't have money for tuition and rent. I remembered how I had manipulated budget lines, cut costs from the board's coffee breaks, and secured a full research grant for him. I bet on him when no one else would. There was a misunderstanding, Robert, I said, choosing my words carefully but letting the bitterness show. My daughter-in-law, Liam's mother, thought my presence was not appropriate for the event. She said I wasn't invited and that I was embarrassing the family. She told me to get out. Robert's smile vanished instantly. His expression hardened, transforming into that severe face that commanded respect across the entire campus. He released my hands gently and straightened his posture, seeming to grow taller before me. She said that? That you weren't invited? He repeated, his voice low and dangerous. She did. And I think it's best if I just go home. I don't want to cause any trouble, Robert. Liam is happy. It's his day. I'm just an old woman. You are not just an old woman, Mrs. Eleanor, he interrupted me firmly. You are the reason half of this campus exists. You are the reason I am standing here wearing these robes. If it weren't for your management at the foundation, this university would have gone bankrupt in the crisis of '98. He looked at the driver, who was waiting with the door open. George, wait here. Then he offered me his arm, a firm arm covered by the velvet of his academic robe. You are not going anywhere. You are going to walk in with me, and you're going to walk in through the front door as the guest of honor that you are. Robert, no. I tried to retreat, the fear of humiliation returning. Tiffany will make a scene. She's difficult. Leave Tiffany to me, he said, with a glint in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. It was the glint of someone who held power and knew exactly how to use it. Tonight, you are not the unwanted mother-in-law. Tonight, you are the Iron Lady of the Foundation, and I want to see who will have the courage to tell you to get out when you're sitting at the Chancellor's table. I looked at his arm, then at the brightly lit ballroom in the distance. I thought of Tiffany's face. I thought of Roger's silence. I thought of Liam's turned back. Suddenly, the sadness gave way to something I thought had died with my retirement. Ambition. Not ambition for money, but for justice. I had spent years being invisible so as not to overshadow my son's fragile ego and my daughter-in-law's vanity. But that invisibility had come at too high a price. I straightened my spine, smoothed my hair, tidying the white strands, wiped away the last trace of a tear, and lifted my chin. You're right, Chancellor, I said, accepting his arm. The fabric was soft to the touch. I believe I have a few acquaintances in there who need a history lesson. Robert smiled, satisfied. Let's go, Mrs. Eleanor. The party is about to truly begin. We walked together toward the main entrance. The security guard who had given me a sympathetic look before widened his eyes when he saw me arm in arm with the university's highest authority. He opened the double doors with an exaggerated bow. The cold air conditioning hit my face again, but this time I didn't feel cold. I felt the heat of battle. I was about to enter the lion's den, but this time I wasn't the prey. I was accompanied by the lion tamer, and Tiffany, with her hot pink dress and her plastic arrogance, had no idea the size of the problem she had just created for herself. I took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scent of power and academia. The tables had turned, and I couldn't wait to watch the first piece fall. Returning to the ballroom was like stepping through a portal into another dimension. If minutes before I had left through the back, bent under the weight of shame and familial rejection, I now returned on the red carpet of the main entrance, arm in arm with the highest authority of that institution. The air conditioning seemed less aggressive, almost like a refreshing breeze drying the last traces of tears from my face. Beside me, Chancellor Robert maintained a regal posture, but I could feel the tension vibrating in his arm. He was indignant on my behalf, and that vicarious indignation served as the first fuel to warm my spirit. As we walked, my eyes, previously fixed on the floor to avoid looks of pity, now scanned the room with an acuity I hadn't exercised in years. I was no longer looking for a dark corner to hide in. I was mapping the territory. The hall was an ecosystem of vanities. I saw groups of local politicians exchanging business cards near the seafood buffet. Businessmen I knew were behind on their taxes, laughing loudly with glasses of red wine, and young graduates who had no idea that the floor beneath their feet had been financed with funds I had sweat blood to get approved by the state board. Their ignorance was a blessing, my family's a cardinal sin. Robert leaned slightly toward me without slowing his pace. "Do you remember that gentleman in the gray suit near the orchestra?" he whispered, discreetly nodding his head. I squinted. The man had aged, was balder, but his aquiline nose was unmistakable. "Dr. Arnold, the chairman of the Board of Trustees." "The very one," Robert confirmed with a knowing smile. "He only came tonight because I told him we'd be making an honorable mention of the financial management of 1998. He said he needed to shake the hand of the woman who saved his reputation when the contractor scandal broke. He thinks you're a legend, Mrs. Eleanor." Those words hit me with the force of a revelation. A legend. While Tiffany saw me as a nuisance, an old piece of furniture that didn't match the decor, the people who actually mattered in that room saw me as a pillar. I had spent the last few years so focused on being a present grandmother and an invisible mother-in-law that I had completely forgotten who I had been. Eleanor Bennett, the woman who made contractors tremble and bent state secretaries with an Excel spreadsheet and a stern look. My hidden resources weren't just the money I had saved and used to help Liam in secret. My true resource was institutional memory. I knew where the skeletons were buried. I knew who owed favors to whom. I knew, for example, that the father of that vapid friend of Tiffany's, who was laughing with her now, only got the environmental permit for his factory because the university issued a favorable technical report, a report that only left the drawer because I personally fast-tracked the bureaucracy over an Easter holiday. I wasn't a gatecrasher. I was the owner of the house. As we approached the reserved area, the head table, I felt a wave of self-reflection wash over me. How had I let it get to this point? How did a woman who negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts end up being shooed away by a daughter-in-law who had never worked a day in her life and lived on appearances? The answer was bitter, but necessary. Love, or what I thought was love. For love of Roger, I stayed silent when he chose a wife who treated me with disdain. For love of Liam, I accepted being the grandmother who stays in the background, paying the study abroad bills while his parents took the credit. I made myself smaller so they could feel big. I became the doormat so they wouldn't have to step on the cold floor of the financial reality I was silently helping to keep warm. I looked at my hands resting on the velvet of the robe. They were hands with age spots, prominent veins, but they no longer trembled. They were the hands that signed the checks that paid for the party where Tiffany was now parading. The irony was so thick I could taste the metal in my mouth. I had confused humility with subservience. Albert, my late husband, would have been ashamed to see me leaving through the back. "Eleanor," he would have said, "the one holding the pen doesn't ask for permission to write." I had put down the pen a long time ago, but luckily the Chancellor had just handed me a new one, full of permanent ink. It was in this moment of introspection that I spotted my family. They were at a central table, well-positioned, but far from the VIP area where I was being led. Tiffany was gesticulating wildly, laughing at something, her chin tilted up with that typical arrogance of someone who thinks the world owes them reverence. Roger maintained that strained smile, pouring more drinks for his wife. Always the servant, never the master. And Liam? Liam was taking selfies with his friends, a perfect smile, his hair artfully disheveled. The boy I watched grow up looked like a stranger. They didn't see me. They were too busy celebrating their own mediocrity. For them, the Eleanor problem had been solved. I was out in the cold, probably crying in a taxi on the way back to my old house. Their internal reality was built on the certainty of my irrelevance, but the external, true reality was about to collide with their fantasy world. Robert stopped before the main table. elevated on a dais that offered a panoramic view of the entire event. There were 6 chairs, 1 for the chancellor, 1 for the vice-chancellor, 2 for the event staff, and 2 empty ones with reserved signs. "Please, Mrs. Eleanor." Robert pulled out the chair to his right, the place of highest honor. I sat down. The upholstery was soft, the white linen tablecloth immaculate. In front of me were crystal glasses and silver cutlery. From the height of that dais, I could see everything. I saw the 300 heads. I saw Tiffany's table, which now seemed small, insignificant, lost in the common crowd. The perspective had completely changed. Down there, near the pillar, I was an intruder. Up here, I was the jury. A waiter appeared immediately, pouring water and wine. He looked at me with curiosity, probably trying to figure out who this lady in the navy blue suit was, sitting next to the chancellor in a seat normally reserved for governors or major donors. "Robert," I called, my voice firm, without a trace of the fragility from minutes ago. "Tell me, my dear. You mentioned a tribute. How will it work?" He took a sip of water and smiled. "I was going to give a brief speech about the building's history and call you up to receive a plaque. But given the circumstances, I think we can improvise something more interesting. The microphone is open." My eyes fixed on table 14, where Tiffany had just spilled a bit of champagne on her dress and was blaming the waiter with rude gestures. "I want to speak," I decided. "I don't just want to receive the plaque and smile. I want to talk about legacy, about construction, about what truly supports a structure, whether it's a building or a family." Robert raised an eyebrow, intrigued and satisfied. "The floor will be yours, Eleanor. In 10 minutes, when the Master of Ceremonies announces the start of the official proceedings." 10 minutes. I had 10 minutes to refine my plan. It wouldn't be a brawl. I wouldn't sink to Tiffany's level. Shouting, swearing, making a scene, those were the weapons of someone with no arguments. My revenge would be served cold, elegant, and devastating. I would use the truth, only the truth. I began to mentally map out my strategy. First, I needed to be seen, but not just any way. I needed to be seen at the moment they could do nothing about it. If Tiffany saw me now, she might try to come up here, make a scene, claim I was senile and bothering the chancellor. No. The element of surprise was vital. I leaned toward Robert. "Is it possible to have the lighting focus only on the stage until it's my turn to speak? I want to remain in the shadows until my name is announced." "Consider it done," he said, signaling to a sound and light technician nearby. Perfect. I would sit there in the shadows of power, observing their every move. I saw Roger check his watch anxiously. I saw Liam hug his father, a gesture that seemed genuine but now made me nauseous. They were happy in their lie. I remembered a saying my father had, "When you give a fool enough rope, he'll not only hang himself, he'll trip and bring the whole house down with him." Tiffany had told me to get out so I wouldn't embarrass them. Little did she know that true embarrassment doesn't come from a grandmother dressed simply, but from ingratitude exposed under the spotlights. I picked up my wineglass. The ruby liquid shone under the dim light. I brought it to my lips and took a generous sip. It was an excellent Cabernet Sauvignon, full-bodied, with oaky notes. I had probably approved the purchase of this vintage for the Chancellery's wine cellar years ago, foreseeing future events. I always thought about the future. They only thought about the now. "Is everything all right, Eleanor?" Robert asked, noticing my concentrated silence. I smiled. It wasn't the timid smile of Grandma Eleanor. It was the smile of the financial director who had just found a serious inconsistency in the balance sheet and knew exactly who was about to be fired. "Never been better, Robert. Just calculating interest." "Interest?" "Yes. Life is like a bank, my friend. You can make withdrawals and deposits. My daughter-in-law has spent her life making withdrawals from the account of my patience and generosity. Today, the account went into the red, and I'm here to collect the debt." Robert let out a low, respectful chuckle. "Remind me never to owe you anything." The Master of Ceremonies walked onto the stage, testing the microphone. The sound reverberated through the hall, causing the conversations to quiet down. The lights in the hall began to dim, creating an atmosphere of expectation. A spotlight illuminated the university crest at the center of the stage. Down below, at table 14, I saw Tiffany fix her hair and turn toward the stage, undoubtedly expecting her son's name to be the center of attention. She was expecting applause for the successful family she believed she had built. I adjusted the pearl brooch on my chest. That brooch signified dignity. And tonight, dignity would not be silent. It would have a voice, and that voice would echo through every corner of that ballroom, ensuring that no one would ever again dare to tell me to get out of a place I helped build, brick by brick. The chess match had begun, and I was already positioning my queen for the attack, while they were still trying to understand the rules of the game. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat into the microphone, that static crackle that precedes major speeches, and the ballroom fell into a respectful hush. Only the stage and our table, the chancellor's table, were softly, almost celestially, lit by indirect lighting. I felt comfortably settled on my velvet throne, observing the commoners below through the rim of my crystal glass. It was time to move the first pieces. I made a discreet signal with my index finger, a gesture I used 30 years ago to summon my assistants. Immediately, the head waiter, a gray-mustached man named James, whom I recognized from the days of the executive dining hall, approached. He was trembling slightly. He knew who I was. The memory of long-serving staff is deep, and my rigor regarding service quality was legendary. "Yes, Mrs. Eleanor," he whispered, bowing so low his nose almost touched the linen tablecloth. "It's an honor to serve you again. The Chancellor informed me of your presence." "James, how are things?" I asked, without taking my eyes off table 14, where Tiffany was fanning herself frantically with the menu, visibly annoyed by the heat or the lack of attention. "Everything under control, ma'am. The buffet is—" "James," I cut him off, my tone soft but firm. "Do you see that table in the center, table 14, with the woman in the hot pink dress who looks like a lost flamingo?" He squinted in the indicated direction. "Yes, ma'am. The family of the graduate Liam Bennett. They've complained about the champagne twice, said it wasn't cold enough." I smiled, Tiffany being Tiffany. "Very well, James. I want you to instruct your team to skip that table during the service of the hot appetizers. Just for now. If they call for a waiter, tell them the kitchen is prioritizing the tables of the guests of honor and the university's donors." James blinked in confusion for a second, but a glint of mischief appeared in his eyes. He had always detested arrogant people. "As you wish, Mrs. Eleanor, an administrative priority." He moved away silently. Robert, beside me, pretended to be paying attention to the Vice-Chancellor's opening remarks, but I could see the corner of his mouth twitching in a suppressed smile. He knew that psychological torture is sometimes more effective than direct confrontation. Down below, the scene began to unfold. Waiters emerged in a single file, balancing trays of shrimp vol au vents and brie puffs. The scent of buttery puff pastry wafted up to us. They served table 13, served table 15, and with an almost military-like choreography, they skirted around table 14 as if it were invisible, or worse, contagious. I saw Tiffany snap her fingers. I saw her call a young man over. The waiter stopped, listened to something, made a vague gesture of apology, pointing towards the ceiling, likely indicating the chain of command, and moved on. Her face turned a shade of red that clashed violently with the pink of her dress. Roger, my spineless son, just shrugged and ate a piece of bread from the bread basket, trying to calm the beast. That was just the appetizer. The main course would be my presence. The Vice-Chancellor's speech ended with polite applause. Robert leaned toward me. "They'll soon start calling the graduates for the symbolic diploma presentation. Liam is in engineering. He'll be in one of the first groups. Will you want to go down to congratulate him?" I twisted the old class ring on my finger, a relic. "No, Robert. The people who go down are in the audience. Those at the head table wait for others to come to them. But I have a special request for when his name is called. Anything. When Liam gets up on that stage, I want the Jumbotron cameras to show the reaction from his family's table, and then I want them to show the reaction from the head table." Robert frowned, calculating the impact. "You want them to see you on the big screen." "I want them to see who is clapping and who isn't." The ceremony began. Names were called, young people walked up, smiles, flashes. With each group, the tension at table 14 seemed to mount. Tiffany looked around, comparing herself to the other mothers, checking if her fake jewels sparkled more than the real ones on others. She lived in a competition that existed only in her head. Then it was the engineering school's turn. Liam Bennett, the master of ceremonies' voice boomed. Liam went on stage. He was handsome, I can't deny it. He had his grandfather's stature. But his eyes were shifty, lacking character. He smiled at the audience, looking for his parents. At that moment, the giant screen behind the stage, which until then had only shown the graduate's face, split. On one side, Liam's face. On the other, the camera focused on table 14. Tiffany jumped to her feet, screaming, blowing exaggerated kisses, making a scene that was out of place in the elegant setting. Roger clapped awkwardly. It was the perfect picture of a happy family from a margarine commercial, if the margarine had gone rancid. Liam saw his parents on the screen and waved. It was then that the image of table 14 cut away, and in its place, in high definition, appeared the chancellor's table. The entire ballroom saw it. 300 people saw it. Liam on stage turned to look at the screen behind him and froze. His smile wavered, trembled, and died. On the screen, I wasn't smiling. I wasn't clapping. I was sitting with a perfectly straight spine, holding my wine glass at chest height, staring into the camera with an expression of absolute judgment. Beside me, Chancellor Robert wasn't applauding either. He was looking at me with deference. A murmur ran through the hall. "Who is that lady?" People must have been asking. "Why is she on the screen? Why isn't she clapping?" Down at table 14, I saw the exact moment the penny dropped. Tiffany had just sat down, pleased with her performance when she looked up. She squinted, confused, nudged Roger, and pointed at the screen. I was far away, but I knew my son. I could see his lips form the word, "Mom." Tiffany shook her head vehemently. She must have been saying, "Impossible, I threw that old woman out. She's on a bus right now. It must be a look-alike." Denial is a powerful defense mechanism, but a fragile one in the face of reality. Liam received his diploma from the dean, but his eyes never left my image projected above him. He walked off the stage, stumbling on the step, dazed. That stumble was the first crack in the perfect evening they had planned. The waiter James returned to my table to refill the water. "Mrs. Eleanor," he whispered as he poured. "The lady at table 14 is asking the waiters who the woman in blue sitting with the chancellor is. She's agitated. Said it must be a mistake by the organizers to project the image of strangers." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Tell her, James, that it's no mistake. Tell her the woman in blue is the event's benefactor, and take this to their table." I pointed to the bottle of wine on our table, a prized French label, a special vintage reserved for the chancellery. "Take the full bottle and deliver it with this note." I took a fine paper napkin and a gold pen from my purse. I wrote 3 words in my firm, angular cursive, "For the guests." I didn't sign it. The handwriting would be enough. Roger knew that handwriting. He had seen it on every check that had paid for his whims for 40 years. James took the bottle and the napkin as if he were transporting nuclear warheads. I watched his journey. He crossed the ballroom with the elegance of someone carrying a death sentence. He arrived at table 14. Tiffany was arguing with Roger, her finger pointed. Liam had just reached the table, pale, tossing his diploma onto the dirty plates. James placed the bottle of imported wine in the center of the table, brusquely pushing aside the cheap sparkling wine they had been drinking. The gesture was one of delicious disdain. Then he handed the napkin to Roger. Roger read it. I saw his shoulders slump. He seemed to shrink in his chair. He passed the paper to Tiffany. She read it, crumpled the napkin in anger, looked at the bottle, looked at the empty stage, and finally, twisted her body in her chair, turning completely around to look up, toward the dais where I sat. Our eyes met. It was a distance of 100 feet, but the electricity of her hatred reached me without losing any voltage. She knew. There was no more doubt. The poor old woman she had shooed away was drinking the wine she couldn't afford, sitting in the chair she dreamed of being in. I raised my glass in a silent toast, directly to her. I tilted my head slightly in a cheers gesture. Tiffany shot up abruptly, knocking over her chair. The noise drew the attention of the neighboring tables. She looked ready to march to the dais, climb the stairs, and make the kind of scene she specialized in. I waited for it. I wished for it. If she came, she'd be stopped by security before she reached the third step. But Roger grabbed her by the arm. For the first time in his life, I saw my son restrain his wife with force. They argued. She pointed at me, shouting something inaudible over the ambient music. He pulled her arm down, hissing, looking around, dying of the very embarrassment she so feared. The shame was now emanating from her. Liam just sat and covered his face with his hands. He knew the party was over. It seems the gift was not well received, Robert commented, pouring himself some more water. On the contrary, Chancellor, the gift was reality, and reality tends to be bitter for those who live on appearances. Are you ready for the next phase? He asked, consulting his watch. Your speaking time is approaching. I took a deep breath. The initial satisfaction was giving way to a strategic coldness. Seeing them confused and fighting was good, but it wasn't enough. They needed to understand why this was happening. This wasn't petty revenge, it was a corrective lesson. Robert, I've changed my mind about the tone of the speech. Oh, going to go easy on them? I glanced at table 14, where Tiffany was now drinking a glass of water with trembling hands, trying to fix her rage-smeared makeup. No, I was going to talk about finance and legacy, but I think I'll talk about high-risk investments instead. How so? I'm going to explain to this room full of business leaders and politicians that the worst investment anyone can make is in ingratitude. And I'll use practical examples, without naming names, of course. The cap will fit whoever's head it was meant for. Just then, an elegant woman in a gray pantsuit approached table 14. It was the mayor's wife. I knew her by sight. We had served on a few community boards years ago. She stopped to congratulate Liam. I saw Tiffany light up instantly, flashing that fake smile, trying to engage in conversation, probably to show she had connections. The mayor's wife smiled politely, but her eyes soon drifted upward to the chancellor's table. She waved. Not at Robert, but at me. I waved back graciously. The mayor's wife said something to Tiffany and pointed at me. From the lip reading and Tiffany's shocked expression, the dialogue must have been something like, "Did you see Mrs. Eleanor is here? What an honor to have the legend of finance at your son's graduation. You must be so proud." Tiffany was speechless. Her smile froze into a grotesque grimace. She couldn't say, "I kicked her out." She couldn't say, "I didn't know who she was." She was trapped by the very social ignorance she championed. I saw her swallow her venom, forced to agree that her mother-in-law's presence was an honor, while inside she was seething, knowing she had treated me like trash. That was the coup de grace before the final execution. She realized that in this room, the social hierarchy was inverted. Out there, in the luxury condo financed over 30 years, she might be the queen. Here, in the temple of knowledge and institutional power, she was just the noisy companion of a mediocre alumnus. Robert stood up. The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice thundered, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. "This evening is a celebration for our graduates. But an educational institution is not just made of students and professors. It is made of history, of foundations. And sometimes we are fortunate enough to have those foundations present among us, in the flesh, reminding us that dignity does not age." He paused dramatically. I felt my heart quicken, not with nervousness, but with readiness. I was ready to step out of the shadows. "I would like to break protocol," Robert continued, "to invite to the microphone a woman who for decades was the silent guardian of this university. A woman many of you know by her results, but few know by her face. The woman who ensured that the lights in this hall would be on tonight." Robert turned to me and extended his hand. "Please come up here, my friend and mentor, Eleanor Bennett." The spotlight that had been illuminating the crest moved. It swept across the stage and came to find me. The strong white light blinded me for a moment, but I quickly adjusted. I rose slowly, straightening my blue linen blazer. The applause started timidly, initiated by the mayor's table, followed by the older professors, and soon spread through the room like a wave. It wasn't polite applause. It was applause of recognition. I walked to the podium. With each step, I felt myself grow 4 inches taller. I took the microphone. The metal was cold. I looked down at table 14. Tiffany was as pale as wax. Roger had his head buried in his hands. Liam was looking at me with his mouth agape, as if seeing a ghost. They had wanted me to get out so I wouldn't embarrass them. Well, I wasn't getting out. But the embarrassment? Oh, that was just beginning to be served, and I would make sure they ate every last crumb. I smiled at the audience, a grandmother's smile, sweet and dangerous. Good evening, everyone. My voice came out clear, filling every corner of the room. It's funny how life comes full circle. An hour ago, I was in the parking lot, believing my time had passed. But it seems the university, unlike certain people, knows how to value those who actually pay the bills. The silence that followed was so absolute, you could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. It was time for the reveal. I held the microphone firmly, feeling the cool weight of the metal in my palm. The silence in the ballroom was so absolute I could hear the faint hum of the speakers. And if I listened closely, I could have sworn I heard my son's heart pounding at table 14. I didn't need to shout. Years of board meetings had taught me that the most dangerous voice is the one that speaks softly, deliberately, and with the certainty of truth. Many of you see this convention center as just a beautiful building of glass and concrete, I began, looking directly into the eyes of the audience, scanning the room from left to right. But I see the foundations. I see what's buried underground that allows all of this to stand. And in life, just as in engineering, what supports a structure isn't the paint on the facade or the crystal chandelier. It's what no one sees. It's the silent sacrifice. I paused. I saw the mayor nod his head in the front row. Today, I was informed by someone very close to me that my presence here was an embarrassment, that I lacked the class to be among the elite. I let out a short, dry laugh. It's curious. Class, my friends, cannot be bought in a boutique. Class is recognizing who held the ladder for you to climb. Down below, Tiffany tried to get up. I saw her chair scrape against the floor, a shrill sound that made several people at the next table turn their heads in disapproval. She grabbed her purse, her face red, and pulled on Roger's arm. I knew exactly what she was saying. We're leaving now. That old woman has gone mad. But Roger didn't move. He was paralyzed, staring at me like a rabbit in the headlights of a truck. The fear of losing his inheritance, the fear of scandal, the fear of the truth, all of it kept him glued to his chair. Tiffany, realizing her husband wouldn't obey, tried to leave alone. She took 2 steps toward the side exit, her heels clicking loudly. It was a desperate attempt to flee the humiliation she herself had sown. But fate, or rather Chancellor Robert, had other plans. One of the security guards, the same George who had helped me in the parking lot, took a discreet sidestep, blocking the aisle. He didn't touch her, just crossed his hands in front of his body and shook his head, indicating that the exit was temporarily restricted during the official speech. Tiffany stopped, incredulous. She looked around for support but found only the curious and contemptuous gazes of the other guests who wanted to hear what the lady from the Jumbotron had to say. She was forced to return to her table, perching on the edge of her chair as if it were on hot coals. I turned my attention back to the microphone. Now that the audience was captive, it was time to open the accounting books of my family life. My grandson, Liam, has just graduated with a degree in engineering. It's a proud moment. I looked at the young man. He was pale, fiddling with the knot of his tie as if he were suffocating. Liam has always been a brilliant boy. I remember when he wanted to do an exchange program in Canada. The family was going through a delicate time. Credit card debt, payments on luxury cars that didn't fit the budget, the need to keep up appearances in an expensive gated community. A murmur rippled through the hall. At table 14, Roger covered his face with both hands. Tiffany looked around, pretending it wasn't about her, nervously fixing her hair. Liam was told that the money for the exchange program came from an old savings account left by his grandfather, my late husband Albert, a magical inheritance that appeared at just the right time. My voice cracked slightly, but I regained control. The truth, ladies and gentlemen, is that Albert died leaving only the house we lived in and a modest pension. There was no secret savings account. I took a deep breath, preparing the final blow of that revelation. The money for the exchange program, the thousands for his English course, and the overdue tuition payments that were mysteriously settled. All of it came from my account. It came from selling the jewelry my mother left me. It came from the savings of a retiree who didn't fit in at tonight's party. I sold my past to secure my grandson's future, and I did it in silence so that my son wouldn't feel the shame of not being able to provide, and so my daughter-in-law could continue buying designer bags without guilt. The shock in the room was palpable. 300 people held their breath. This was no longer gossip. It was a raw human drama exposed under the merciless light of truth. Liam snapped his head up, looking at his father. Even from a distance, I could read his lips. Dad. Was it Grandma? Roger couldn't even look at his son. He shrugged his shoulders in defeat, confirming everything with his cowardly silence. Tiffany, meanwhile, looked as if she had been physically slapped. The narrative she had built, that they were wealthy and self-sufficient, and that I was the poor relative, had crumbled in seconds. Everyone there, their society friends, the parents of Liam's classmates, now knew her lifestyle was subsidized by the mother-in-law she despised. The shame she had wanted me to feel had bounced back onto her, multiplied 1,000 times. But I wasn't finished yet. The financial revelation was just the foundation. Now came the moral lesson. I don't say this to demand the money back, I continued, softening my tone. Money comes and goes. What hurts me is the moral bankruptcy. Today, at the door of this very hall, I was barred by my own family. They told me I wasn't invited, that I should get out. I heard exclamations of indignation from the audience. How outrageous! Someone said loudly near the stage. Ungrateful! Another voice shouted. The public verdict was in. I almost left. I almost accepted being invisible one more time. But then Chancellor Robert reminded me of who I am. I smiled at my friend beside me, who wore an expression of paternal pride. I am Eleanor Bennett. I dedicated 40 years to this institution. And I've discovered that if I'm not good enough to sit at my family's table because of my simple clothes, perhaps my family isn't good enough to sit at the table where I am now. I gestured to the empty chair beside me on the dais of honor. Liam, I called out directly. The sound of his name echoed. You're an engineer now. You've learned to calculate the strength of materials. But you need to learn to calculate the weight of gratitude. A bridge without a foundation collapses, my boy. And a life built on ingratitude and appearances collapses too. Liam stood up. He was crying. Not discreetly, but with visible tears. He looked at his mother, who tried to hold him back by his jacket, hissing at him to sit down. He yanked his arm away violently, freeing himself from her. It was the first time I had ever seen my grandson resist Tiffany's tyranny. He looked at his father, who remained inert, and then he looked at me. He made a move to come to the stage, taking 2 steps toward the side stairs. I held up my hand in a stop gesture. No, Liam. My voice was firm, but sad. Don't come up here now. The time for a photo has passed. The time to defend me out there in the cold has passed. Now is the time for you to sit and reflect on what kind of man you want to be. Whether you'll be the man your grandmother's money paid to educate, or the man your mother wants to shape for her social display window. He stopped in his tracks, desolate. The audience was stunned. No one had ever seen a matriarch deliver such a lesson in public. It was brutal, but it was necessary. It was love in its most severe form, correction. I turned back to the audience to conclude. I thank the Chancellor for this impromptu honor, and I want to take this opportunity to make an announcement. I pulled an envelope from my blazer pocket. I had been saving one last investment, a considerable sum that was to be the final inheritance to help my son pay off his condo. I saw Tiffany's eyes widen with a mixture of greed and terror. She knew that money would save them from their mounting debts. However, I continued, tearing the envelope in half symbolically, though it was just a copy of the bank document. I've decided that the best investment isn't patching holes for those who don't know how to manage their own lives. As of today, this fund will be donated in its entirety to create the Eleanor Bennett Scholarship, designated for low-income students who need a grandmother to believe in them. The room erupted. It wasn't just applause. It was a standing ovation. People stood up. The mayor stood up. The professors stood up. The sound was deafening. They were applauding the act, the courage, the justice. As the room vibrated, I looked at table 14. They were sitting. They were the only ones sitting, isolated in a sea of people who repudiated them. Tiffany was crying tears of rage, smearing all her expensive makeup. Roger stared into space, realizing he had lost his mother and his inheritance in the same night. And Liam. Liam looked at me with a mixture of regret and admiration. He had lost his grandmother, the benefactor, but he had just met the legendary woman everyone was talking about. I handed the microphone back to the Chancellor, feeling my legs tremble slightly, not from weakness, but from the adrenaline rush. Robert took my hand and kissed it in front of everyone. "You are extraordinary, Eleanor," he whispered. I sat back down on my velvet throne. The waiter James, with tears in his eyes, immediately refilled my wine glass. "On the house, Mrs. Eleanor," he said. The ceremony continued, but the mood had changed. The party was no longer about the graduates. It was about the new dynamic that had been established. I was no longer the retired widow from the quiet neighborhood. I was the moral patroness of the evening. About 20 minutes later, as the band started to play and dinner was served, I saw movement at the side of the dais. It was Tiffany. She had managed to compose herself, reapplied her lipstick, and was climbing the short stairs to the VIP area with that "let's forget everything" smile. Her ability to feign amnesia was astonishing. She had Roger in tow like an obedient puppy. She neared the velvet rope separating our area. The security guard, George, blocked her path. "Mother-in-law," she called out, trying to make her voice sound sweet over the music. "Eleanor, darling, what a moving speech. We need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. About all of this. Let's take a picture together. The society photographer is here." I looked down at her. She wanted the picture. She wanted to validate her presence there beside me to try and salvage what little reputation she had left. She thought a smile and a fake compliment would be enough for me to open my wallet again and forget the humiliation in the parking lot. I picked up my wine glass and swirled the liquid slowly. I glanced at Robert. "Chancellor, was this lady invited to this area?" Robert didn't even look at her, continuing to cut his filet mignon. "Not on the list, Mrs. Eleanor." I turned my gaze back to Tiffany. Her smile faltered. "Eleanor, please, it's Roger, your son," she pleaded, pushing Roger forward. Roger looked at me. "Mom," he began, his voice weak. Tiffany didn't mean what she said out there. She was nervous. "And about the money, we can explain." I sighed. The disappointment in Roger hurt more than the anger at Tiffany. "Roger," I said, my voice calm, "you are almost 50 years old. Stop hiding behind your wife's skirt. And Tiffany." I stood up and walked to the edge of the dais, standing a yard away from her, separated only by the velvet rope and the guard. She smiled hopefully, thinking she had won. "Yes, mother-in-law?" "You told me outside to get out before I embarrassed you." I leaned forward, speaking low enough for only them to hear. "I'm not getting out." "But you're already embarrassed enough. Now do me a favor and go back to your table and enjoy the buffet. After all, I paid for it, so you can eat as much as you want. But up here, you only get in by invitation. And your invitation was revoked the moment you forgot that honor thy father and thy mother is the only commandment with a promise." "But the inheritance." "The money for the house." Tiffany let slip, financial desperation overriding her dignity. I let out a genuine laugh. "Work for it, dear. I hear the job market is excellent for someone with as much class and etiquette as you. I'm sure your gel nails won't get in the way of filling out applications." I gave a signal to George. "You may remove them, please. They're obstructing the Chancellor's view." George, with a professionally satisfied smile, took a step forward. "You heard her. Please return to your seats or I will have to ask you to leave the event." Tiffany opened her mouth to make a scene, but she looked around. Several people from nearby tables were filming with their phones. If she screamed now, it would be the absolute end. She swallowed hard, hatred burning in her eyes, turned on her heel and walked down the stairs, dragging Roger with her. I returned to my seat. Liam hadn't come with them. I scanned the room and saw him sitting alone at an empty table in the back, Far from his parents, his head bowed. Maybe there was still hope for him. Maybe the shame was the bitter medicine he needed to cure his blindness. Robert raised his glass to me. "Checkmate, Mrs. Eleanor." "Not yet, Robert," I replied, feeling a peace I hadn't felt in years. The checkmate was in their game. In my game, the match has just restarted, and now I make the rules. I drank my wine. It tasted of justice, with notes of freedom and a lingering aftertaste of victory. I was alone in my widowhood, but I had never been more in the company of myself. The old woman from the 2-story house had died in the parking lot. The woman sitting here was the Iron Lady, and she had a lot of work to do. The night was far from over, and I had the feeling that, for the first time in a long time, the next day's dawn would bring something I had forgotten to wish for, a future that was all my own. The party music faded behind me, muffled by the heavy glass doors that closed. This time I didn't leave through the back, fleeing like a criminal. I left through the front door, personally escorted by Chancellor Robert to the official university car. The driver, George, opened the door with a kindness that wasn't trained. It was sincere. As the car glided through the silent city streets, I rested my head against the leather seat and for the first time in years, felt a silence that wasn't loneliness, but peace. The peace of someone who had finally set the record straight and closed a ledger that had been in the red for far too long. When I arrived at my house in the historic neighborhood, it felt different. Before, these walls filled with old portraits and solid wood furniture seemed to be waiting for visits that never came, or that came only to complain about the old-fashioned smell. Now, the house welcomed me like a sanctuary. I took off my heels in the living room, feeling the cool hardwood floor under my feet, and walked to the kitchen to make coffee. It was 2 a.m, but I had never been more awake. The aroma of coffee grounds meeting hot water filled the air, a scent of new beginnings. I was no longer the grandmother waiting for crumbs of attention. I was Eleanor, the author of her own story. In the days that followed, the phone rang incessantly. Roger called dozens of times. Tiffany, with an audacity bordering on madness, sent tearful audio messages, alternating between flimsy apologies and attempts at emotional manipulation, talking about family unity. I listened to the first one, deleted the rest, and blocked her number. With Roger, I was more direct. I answered on Tuesday morning while watering my ferns on the porch. "Mom, for God's sake, we need to talk." His voice was hoarse, desperate. "Tiffany is having anxiety attacks. The condo association sent the special assessment bill, and did you really cancel the automatic payments?" "Good morning to you too, son," I replied, plucking a dry leaf from the plant. "Yes, I did. I canceled the condo fees, the car payment, and the supplementary credit card." "But Mom, how are we supposed to live? My salary doesn't even cover half of this. We have a certain standard of living. Do you know what the neighbors will say if we have to sell the SUV?" I took a deep breath, feeling that old pang of maternal guilt, but quickly suffocated it with the memory of him turning his back on me at the party. "Roger, you are 48 years old. If your salary doesn't pay for your life, change your life. Sell the car, move to a cheaper neighborhood, cut back on luxuries. It's what your father and I did when we started." "You're being vindictive," he shouted. "No, son, I'm being educational. The well has run dry. Learn to dig your own." And I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down in anger. I simply placed the receiver back in its cradle with the gentleness of someone terminating a bad contract. The fall of my daughter-in-law's house of cards was swift and loud. News travels fast, especially with so many eyewitnesses. The mayor's wife, who had greeted Tiffany at the party, apparently spread the story through every beauty salon and charity luncheon in the city. Tiffany, who lived by appearances, became persona non grata among the elite she so idolized. I heard through a gossipy neighbor with relatives in their condo complex that a court officer had shown up a week later to repossess one of their cars for non-payment. Humiliated, Tiffany tried to keep up appearances, saying they were upgrading their fleet, but no one believed her. The mask had fallen, and underneath there was no face, only wounded vanity. They had to put their condo on the market in a hurry. The styrofoam empire crumbled with the first breath of reality. While their world shrank, mine expanded. The creation of the Eleanor Bennett Scholarship Fund wasn't just a stage promise. The week after the graduation, I was in Chancellor Roberts' office every day, not as an employee, but as a benefactor. I sat at the head of the table, reviewed applications, interviewed social workers. I felt alive. My mind, which they had deemed outdated, was as sharp as a razor. I vividly remember the first selection. We were reviewing the profile of a girl named Brianna, a janitor's daughter with top marks on her entrance exams, but no money for transportation and food. When I read her motivation letter, I saw myself 60 years ago, taking 2 buses and eating a cold-packed lunch to study accounting. Approved, I stamped the document firmly. And I want the scholarship to include a stipend for books and a decent laptop. No one builds bridges with broken tools. Robert smiled from across the table. You know this money will change her life, don't you? And her entire family's. I know, Robert. It's the only kind of investment that yields infinite returns. Seeing those young people enter the university, their eyes shining with hope and gratitude, filled the hole that my son's ingratitude had left. I discovered that family isn't just about blood. Family is who shares your values. Those boys and girls who called me Mrs. Eleanor with respect and affection were more my grandchildren than Liam had been in years. But life, in its crooked wisdom, still had one surprise in store. About 2 months after the graduation, on a rainy Sunday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw a hooded figure soaked by the rain. It was Liam. My heart skipped a beat. I opened the door, keeping the security chain on. What do you want, Liam? Money? Because if it is, you can turn right around. He lifted his face. He was thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, lacking the slick arrogance his mother had instilled in him. It's not money, Grandma. His voice trembled. I left home. I unlatched the chain and opened the door. Come in before you soak the rug. Liam entered, dripping water onto the living room floor. He had no luggage, just a backpack. He sat on the sofa, hunched over. I served him a hot coffee and sat in the armchair across from him, keeping my distance. I left home, he repeated, holding the cup with both hands to warm them. I couldn't take it anymore. My mom, she's lost it, Grandma. All she talks about is how you ruined her life. She takes no responsibility for anything. Dad's been drinking too much. The house is a living hell. And you thought coming here would be the solution? I asked, my voice hard. No, I didn't come here to live. I got a job. He pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket. It was an employment contract as a technical assistant at a small construction company, far from the glamour he had dreamed of. The salary is low. I'll have to share an apartment with 2 friends on the east side, but it's mine. I looked at the paper. It was a start. And why did you come to show me this? Liam looked me in the eyes, and for the first time, I saw the boy I had rocked to sleep, not the stranger from the party. Because that day on stage when you talked about the bridge without a foundation, that stuck with me. I realized that I'm nothing. I'm just Roger and Tiffany's son supported by his grandmother. I want to be someone, Grandma. And I came to apologize. Not for the money, but for being a coward. For turning my back when you were being humiliated. I was so ashamed of myself. I felt a tear escape, but this time it was one of relief. The reality check had worked. The shame had burned away the frivolity and left a core of character, however rough. Apology accepted, Liam, I said, placing my hand on his. But forgiveness is built with actions, not words. I'm glad you have a job. Work hard, get your boots muddy, learn the value of every penny. Will you still have me as your grandson? I smiled, a weary but genuine smile. I never stopped having a grandson, Liam. I just stopped accepting disrespect. You are welcome in this house for coffee, for cake, for conversation, but not for checks. He nodded, crying silently. That day, we didn't recover lost time, but we laid the foundation for a new relationship, one based on truth, without the golden filter of Tiffany's lies. Time passed. Today, 6 months after that fateful night, I am sitting in the Chancellery garden. The afternoon sun illuminates the old trees on campus. Around me, students are talking, reading, dating. Some of them are my scholarship recipients. They wave to me when they pass, and I wave back. Roger and Tiffany moved to a small town upstate to live with one of her relatives. They fled the social shame. I don't speak to them. And honestly, their absence is a weight lifted from my shoulders. I've learned that sometimes, amputating a gangrenous limb is the only way to save the body. I suffered. I cried into my pillow many nights, asking God to protect my son from his own foolishness, but I held my ground. Love is also letting others bear their own consequences. Liam visits me every other week. He arrives with his boots dirty from the construction site, tired, complaining about his boss, but with a gleam of pride in his eyes when he says he paid his rent with his own money. He is becoming a man, a real man, not the luxury doll his mother wanted. The other day he brought over a girlfriend, a simple young woman, a history teacher. Tiffany would have a heart attack. I made a coffee cake and we spent the afternoon laughing. I look at the convention center building in the distance. The bronze plaque that Robert had installed in the lobby doesn't just bear my name. It reads, "The true structure of any work is the integrity of its builder." I am Eleanor Bennett, 78 years old. I was thrown out of a party, but I gained a new life. I discovered that dignity has no expiration date and that it's never too late to take back the reins of your own destiny. My hidden resources weren't just the money in the bank, but the strength of character I had allowed to lie dormant so as not to outshine the fragile glow of others. Now I shine, not like the ballroom's crystal chandelier, but like the lighthouse that withstands the storm and guides those who truly want to find safe harbor. And for me, that is enough. Justice was served, the legacy is secure, and the future? Ah, the future is an open book. And I am holding the pen firmly, ready to write the best chapters yet to come. M.